The Galactic War Academy had never been designed for humans. Everything about it reminded Ethan Voss of that fact. The corridors were too wide. The ceilings were too tall. Even the gravity felt slightly wrong. The Academy floated in orbit around Arcturus Prime, one of the most influential worlds in the Galactic Coalition. For over 300 years, it had trained the military leaders of dozens of species. Humans had only been members of the Coalition for 48 years, which meant they were still considered newcomers. At best. At worst, they were considered a curiosity. Ethan understood that better than most. As he walked through the Academy's central corridor, cadets from half a dozen species passed by. Towering Kroth warriors moved in disciplined groups. Sleek Volari officers glided through the halls with perfect posture. Even the insect-like Threx cadets carried themselves with quiet confidence. Humans did not. Not here. Not yet. Most human cadets walked with the subtle awareness that everyone else expected less from them. Ethan had grown used to it. He entered Tactical Strategy Hall 3 and took his usual seat near the back. The room was already filling. At the front stood Instructor Zarok, a legendary Kroth strategist whose battlefield simulations were studied throughout Coalition space. Zarok activated the central hologram. A glowing star system appeared above the classroom floor. Today's lesson, he announced, is resource warfare. Several cadets immediately straightened. This was one of the Academy's most difficult subjects. Zarok pointed toward the projection. An enemy fleet has established forward operations inside this system. Their fleet strength exceeds yours by 3 to 1. Their defenses are superior. Their logistics network is fully operational. The hologram shifted. Supply routes appeared. Mining stations. Refueling depots. Defense platforms. The enemy position looked nearly impossible to break. Zarok folded his arms. How do you win? Hands immediately rose. Cadets began offering solutions. Direct assaults. Coordinated bombardments. Electronic warfare. Fleet encirclement. Every answer followed established doctrine. Every answer sounded impressive. And every answer required more ships than Ethan's side possessed. Zarok listened patiently. Then he turned. His yellow eyes landed on Ethan. Human. The room became quiet. Ethan hated when instructors called him that. Not because it was insulting. Because it reminded everyone he was different. You have not spoken. Ethan glanced at the hologram. Then at the supply routes. Then back at Zarok. I wouldn't attack the fleet. Several cadets exchanged looks. Zarok tilted his head. Explain. Ethan stood. The fleet isn't the target. He pointed toward a small station near the edge of the hologram. That's their fuel refinery. A few cadets frowned. Ethan continued. Destroy that and their fleet becomes stranded within 2 weeks. Zarok remained silent. Their warships don't matter, Ethan said. Their logistics do. The room grew noticeably quieter. Most cadets had been staring at the battleships. Ethan had been staring at the fuel. One of the Volari students spoke. That would take longer. Yes, Ethan replied. But it would work. The Volari frowned. Victory delayed is still weakness. Ethan shrugged. Dead enemies usually disagree. Several cadets laughed. Zarok did not. But something shifted in his expression. A tiny movement. Almost invisible. Recognition. Interesting, the instructor said. Then he turned back to the class. Remember this. The hologram zoomed toward the refinery. Most civilizations study how to destroy strength. His gaze briefly returned to Ethan. Humans often study how to remove it. The lesson continued. But Ethan barely heard the rest. Because across the room sat Cadet Kalen Vrax. The Academy's highest-ranked student. A Kroth prodigy. Top of every tactical course. Top of every combat assessment. Top of every leadership evaluation. For 3 straight years. And at that moment, Kalen was staring directly at him. Not with hostility. Not with contempt. Something else. Interest. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, the best cadet in the entire institution had noticed him. Neither of them looked away. Outside the classroom window, the stars of Coalition space drifted silently past. Far beyond those stars, something was already moving toward them. Neither cadet knew it yet. But the calm was beginning to end. The next morning began with combat simulations. For most cadets, this was the favorite part of Academy life. For Ethan Voss, it was simply another problem to solve. The simulation dome occupied nearly an entire section of Arcturus Academy. A massive circular chamber capable of recreating battlefields from across known space. Today it was configured as a mining colony. Rock formations towered over abandoned structures. Cargo yards stretched between processing facilities. Dust storms drifted across the holographic horizon. At exactly 0900 hours, 80 cadets entered the simulation floor. Instructor Xerox stood above them on the observation platform. His deep voice echoed through the chamber. Objective simple. The battlefield hologram activated. A glowing blue command core appeared near the center of the colony. Secure the command core. The display expanded. 8 teams. 10 cadets per team. No alliances. 1 winner. Immediately the room exploded into motion. Most teams charged forward. Exactly as Ethan expected. He watched them disappear into the simulated colony. Then he sat down behind a cargo container. His teammates stared at him. A human cadet named Sarah frowned. Are we moving? No. The silence that followed was painful. A Croth cadet crossed his arms. The objective is that direction. He pointed toward the center. I know. Then why are we sitting here? Ethan looked toward the distant firefight already beginning. Because everyone else was thinking about the objective. Nobody was thinking about what happened afterward. The center is a trap. Several teammates exchanged confused looks. The sounds of combat intensified. Energy rifles. Explosions. Commands being shouted through communicators. The battle was already becoming chaotic. Ethan checked the timer. 2 minutes. 3. 4. The fighting grew louder. A smile slowly appeared on Ethan's face. Exactly as predicted. At 6 minutes, the first team was eliminated. At 7 minutes, another. By 8 minutes, half the battlefield was concentrated around the command core. The strongest cadets were destroying each other. The smartest cadets were too busy trying to win. Ethan stood. Now we move. The team followed. Still confused, but curious, they crossed the battlefield quickly. Not toward the center. Toward the extraction zones. The locations where the command core had to be delivered after capture. A realization slowly spread through the team. Sarah blinked. Oh. Ethan nodded. Exactly. Winning wasn't about taking the core. Winning was about taking it from whoever survived. 10 minutes later, the battlefield erupted again. A powerful Croth team finally emerged from the central fighting. They carried the command core. But they were exhausted. Damage. Reduced to half strength. Exactly what Ethan wanted. The ambush lasted 30 seconds. The outcome was never in doubt. Ethan's team seized the core. Then retreated through prepared defensive positions. By the time the remaining teams understood what had happened, it was already over. The simulation ended. Blue victory lights filled the chamber. For several moments nobody spoke. Then the observation platform opened. Instructor Xerox descended onto the battlefield. The 80 cadets assembled around him. Most looked irritated. Several looked impressed. One looked furious. Cadet Kalen Vrax. The Academy's top-ranked student. His team had controlled the center. His team had won every engagement. His team had taken the command core. And Ethan had stolen victory without fighting the main battle. Kalen approached him. The crowd immediately noticed. Everyone watched. Kalen stopped directly in front of Ethan. You waited. It wasn't an accusation. It sounded more like an investigation. Yes. You allowed others to weaken each other? Yes. The Croth stared at him. You did not seek victory. I did. Kalen shook his head. No. His silver eyes narrowed slightly. You sought the moment after victory. For a second Ethan simply stared. Then he smiled. Because that was exactly right. Something unexpected happened. Kalen smiled back. Only slightly. Only for a moment. But it was there. Recognition. Respect. And perhaps something more dangerous. Interest. Above them, Instructor Xerox watched silently. The old strategist had spent 40 years teaching future military leaders. He recognized patterns. And what he was witnessing now was unusual. Most great commanders competed. These two were beginning to learn from each other. That could become very useful. Or very dangerous. Later that evening, as Ethan stood alone on the Academy observation deck, watching stars drift past the station windows, a quiet unease settled into his thoughts. The simulation victory should have felt satisfying. Instead, something felt wrong. The Academy had increased combat training. Instructors were holding closed-door meetings. Military traffic through nearby systems had doubled. And nobody was talking about why. Far beyond coalition territory, past the last map stars, past the patrol routes, something unseen continued moving through the darkness. And with every passing day, it was getting closer. 3 days later, the first ship disappeared. Officially nothing happened. No emergency announcements. No station-wide alerts. No warnings. Just another ordinary day at Arcturus Academy. Which was exactly why Ethan knew something was wrong. Military organizations loved routine. When routine changed without explanation, it usually meant somebody was hiding something. The first clue appeared during breakfast. Cadets filled the mess hall as usual. Conversations echoed across the room. Plates clattered. Announcements scrolled across the information screens. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Yarachin noticed it too. She slid into the seat across from Ethan carrying a datapad. "You see it?" Ethan nodded. Military traffic. The datapad displayed a star map. Several coalition patrol routes glowed yellow. Normally there would be dozens of active signals moving through the sector. Today there were almost none. Ships were still moving. But their transponders were silent. Military silence. The kind that happened before bad news. Yara lowered her voice. A border patrol failed to report in. Ethan looked up. Confirmed? Not officially. That meant yes. Yara only brought information when she trusted the source. Across the table, Darius Kane stopped eating. Which immediately got Ethan's attention. Darius never stopped eating. How bad? Yara glanced around the room. Then answered quietly. Outer Frontier Sector 7. The words landed heavily. Sector 7. Everyone knew that region. A vast stretch of barely explored territory beyond the coalition's established borders. Most maps simply labeled it unknown space, and recently another name had started appearing in unofficial channels. The Umbra. Nobody knew exactly what it was. Only rumors. Missing survey ships. Broken communications. Long-range sensor contacts that vanished before identification. Strange signals. And silence. Lots of silence. Darius leaned back. Maybe mechanical failure. Nobody answered. Even Darius didn't sound convinced. Because patrol cruisers didn't simply vanish. Especially not coalition vessels. Especially not veteran crews. Especially not near Sector 7. The conversation ended there. Nobody wanted to say the obvious part out loud. Something was out there. And it was getting closer. That afternoon, Ethan attended Advanced Fleet Doctrine. The lesson lasted exactly 12 minutes. Then Instructor Zarok dismissed the class. 12 minutes. A class normally lasted 2 hours. The room filled with confused murmurs. One cadet raised a hand. Sir? Zarok paused. Yes. Why are classes ending early? The instructor studied the room. For a brief moment Ethan thought he might answer honestly. Instead Zarok simply said, operational adjustments. Then he left. The door closed. The room exploded into conversation. Except for Ethan. And one other cadet. Kalen Vrax. The Kroth prodigy sat perfectly still. Watching. Thinking. Calculating. Their eyes met briefly across the classroom. Neither spoke. But Ethan recognized the expression. Kalen had noticed the same thing. Something had changed. That evening the academy held an unscheduled assembly. Every cadet. Every instructor. Every staff member. Mandatory attendance. The massive central auditorium filled quickly. Thousands of seats. Hundreds of species. Anxious whispers everywhere. At precisely 1900 hours the lights dimmed. Commandant Soren appeared on the main display. The elderly Valari officer looked older than usual. More tired. More careful. That alone frightened Ethan. Soren didn't look frightened easily. Attention. The room became silent. The commandant folded his hands behind his back. A coalition patrol vessel assigned to Frontier Sector 7 has failed to report according to established communication schedules. A wave of murmurs spread through the audience. Soren continued. Search operations are underway. The murmurs became louder. At this time there is no evidence of hostile action. Nobody believed that. Not even him. Ethan could hear it in the man's voice. The commandant paused. Then delivered the sentence everyone remembered later. The academy will transition immediately into enhanced readiness operations. Silence. Not panic. Something worse. Recognition. Every cadet understood military language. Enhanced readiness. Combat preparedness. War preparation. The words meant the same thing. Something was coming. Nobody knew what. But the people at the top did. And they were preparing for it. The assembly ended 5 minutes later. Cadets poured into the corridors. Questions spread faster than answers. Rumors multiplied. Fear followed. Ethan found himself standing beside the observation window overlooking the stars. Yara stood beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally she pointed toward the darkness beyond the station, toward the distant edge of explored space. "What do you think is out there?" Ethan stared into the endless black. For several seconds he said nothing, then quietly answered, "I think something looked at us." Yara frowned. "And?" Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the stars. "And I think it decided we were worth studying. Far beyond coalition space, past the final patrol routes, past the last navigation beacons, something enormous moved silently through the dark. And for the first time, it was moving toward humanity." The Academy reacted to uncertainty the same way every military institution reacted to uncertainty. More training, less sleep, higher expectations. Within a week, every cadet at Arcturus Academy found their schedules doubled. Additional combat drills, additional tactical simulations, additional emergency readiness exercises. Nobody complained. The missing patrol vessel remained missing, and everyone knew it. Even if nobody talked about it openly, the instructors certainly didn't. They simply pushed harder. Ethan's rivalry with Kalen Vrax became impossible to ignore. Not because either of them wanted it, because everyone else noticed. Every simulation briefing, every tactical discussion, every combat assessment, the instructors inevitably compared them. The Academy's top-ranked cadet, and the human who kept producing answers nobody expected. The contrast fascinated people. Kalen represented perfection. Years of discipline. Years of study. Years of flawless performance. Ethan represented something else. Improvisation. Adaptation. Unpredictability. Nobody knew which was more dangerous, including Kalen. The next major simulation arrived 9 days after the emergency assembly. The scenario appeared simple. Defend a frontier colony. Enemy forces unknown. Resources limited. Civilian evacuation underway. Standard Academy exercise. At least on the surface. The moment Ethan saw the battlefield map, he knew the scenario was different. Because the instructors weren't measuring victory. They were measuring survival. That was new. The simulation began. 8 teams assumed command positions. Kalen immediately established defensive lines around the colony. Textbook strategy. Strong. Efficient. Correct. Most teams followed similar approaches. Ethan did not. He studied the terrain, the surrounding mountains, the supply roads, the civilian transport routes, and one narrow canyon leading directly toward the colony. Then he smiled. Yara noticed. That was never a good sign. "What?" Ethan pointed. "The canyon." Darius frowned. "It's defensible." "Exactly. That's good." "No." Ethan shook his head. "That's obvious." The team exchanged confused looks. Ethan zoomed the map outward, then farther, and farther, until the surrounding terrain became visible. Finally he pointed again. A dry river valley, 20 kilometers away. Nobody had mentioned it. Nobody had even looked at it, because it wasn't important, until Ethan explained. "If I was attacking," he tapped the valley, "I wouldn't go where you're strongest." Silence. Yara understood first. The others followed seconds later. The enemy wasn't supposed to attack the canyon. The canyon was bait. A distraction. The real attack would come somewhere unexpected. Exactly the way Ethan would do it. So Ethan prepared for the attack he would launch himself. 3 hours later the simulation evaluators released their findings. Enemy forces had indeed bypassed the canyon. They had attacked through the river valley. Exactly as Ethan predicted. Every other team failed. Only one succeeded. Blue team. Ethan's team. Again. The observation platform remained silent for several moments. Then Instructor Zarok ended the simulation. The battlefield dissolved. The holograms vanished. And 80 cadets immediately began discussing what had happened. Except Kalen. Kalen walked directly toward Ethan. The crowd noticed instantly. People stopped talking. Watching. Waiting. The Academy's 2 most discussed cadets stood face to face. Kalen crossed his arms. "You saw it?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." "The valley?" "Yes." Kalen studied him. Not angry. Not frustrated. Something far more interesting. Curious. "I reviewed 17 possible attack vectors." Ethan said nothing. "I dismissed the valley." "Why?" Kalen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because it was inefficient." Ethan smiled. "There it is." "What?" "The difference." Kalen waited. You assume your enemy wants efficiency. The Croth remained silent. Ethan continued. Humans don't always choose the best path. We choose the path nobody expects. For the first time since they met, Kalen looked genuinely surprised. Not shocked. Not defeated. Just forced to reconsider something. The strongest minds hated nothing more than discovering missing pieces. And Ethan had just shown him one. Later that evening, Kalen found Ethan alone on the observation deck. Neither spoke for several moments. Stars drifted beyond the transparent hull. Silent. Ancient. Unchanging. Finally Kalen broke the silence. You think differently. Ethan laughed. So do you? No. Kalen shook his head. My people solve problems. He looked toward the stars. Humans redefine them. Ethan wasn't sure whether that was a compliment or a warning. Perhaps both. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Kalen said something unexpected. My father commands frontier settlements near Sector 7. Ethan turned. That was the first personal thing Kalen had ever revealed. The Croth stared into the darkness. If war comes. His voice remained calm. But there was weight behind it. They will be among the first targets. The words hung between them. No strategy. No rankings. No competition. Just reality. For the first time Ethan saw beyond the academy's top cadet. He saw a son. A family. Someone who suddenly had something to lose. And in that moment, their rivalry changed. Not into friendship. Not yet. But into something more dangerous. Mutual respect. Far beyond the academy. Beyond coalition borders. Beyond the last known systems. The thing moving through the darkness continued its approach. And it was no longer studying. It was preparing. The academy announced the grand assessment 3 days later. Every fourth-year cadet immediately understood what that meant. This was not a simulation. Not really. Officially it was still training. Unofficially it was a selection process. The coalition military needed officers. Fast. And everyone knew why. The war had not been declared. Yet. But preparations were accelerating everywhere. Ships were moving. Fleets were mobilizing. Supply depots were filling. The academy was simply adapting to reality. The grand assessment would determine who received field commissions, who became officers, who would lead when the shooting started, and who would not. The simulation bay had never been this crowded. More than 200 cadets filled the massive chamber. Senior military observers occupied the elevated command decks. Fleet officers, strategic planners, intelligence representatives, people who normally never visited cadet exercises. Today they were watching. Closely. Commander Soren addressed the room. You will receive no tactical briefing. Murmurs spread immediately. That was unusual. Very unusual. Soren continued. You will receive only one objective. The battlefield hologram activated. An entire planetary system appeared above the chamber floor. Gas giants. Mining colonies. Defense stations. Trade routes. Civilian habitats. The scale dwarfed every previous exercise. Then a red symbol appeared. Enemy fleet. The room grew silent. The symbol expanded. One fleet became 3. Then 6. Then 12. Several cadets exchanged worried glances. The enemy force was overwhelming. Outnumbering defenders almost 4-1. Soren folded her hands behind her back. Your objective. A blue marker appeared. Civilian evacuation convoy. Over 3 million simulated civilians. The room became quieter. Ensure evacuation survival. One cadet raised a hand. What about defeating the enemy? Soren's answer came instantly. You cannot. Silence. Absolute silence. That answer changed everything. Every previous exercise had focused on victory. This one focused on survival. That frightened Ethan more than any battle scenario. Because it felt real. The simulation began. Teams immediately moved to establish defense formations. Protecting colonies. Protecting stations. Protecting military assets. The logical choices. The expected choices. The wrong choices. Ethan stared at the star map. Thinking. Calculating. Watching. The enemy fleet movements appeared predictable. Too predictable. Which meant they weren't. Then he saw it. Not what the enemy was attacking. What they were ignoring. The trade routes. Yara noticed him leaning forward. What? Ethan pointed. They don't care about the colonies. Darius frowned. The colonies are the objective. No. Ethan shook his head. The civilians are. Nobody understood. Not yet. Ethan expanded the map. The enemy wasn't targeting population centers. They were targeting transportation hubs, jump gates, refueling stations, navigation relays. They weren't trying to kill civilians. They were trying to trap them. The realization hit Ethan instantly. This isn't an invasion. The team stared. What is it? Ethan looked at the moving red fleet markers. It's a net. His entire strategy changed. While other cadets defended worlds, Ethan defended movement, jump corridors, supply lanes, escape routes. He abandoned 3 colonies entirely, a decision that horrified nearby teams. But Ethan wasn't protecting territory. He was protecting people. The distinction mattered. Hours passed. The simulation grew increasingly chaotic. World after world fell. Defensive fleets were destroyed. Military assets vanished. Yet Ethan's evacuation routes remained operational. Slowly the numbers appeared. Civilian survival rates. Team 1, 21%. Team 2, 18%. Team 3, 27%. Then Blue Team, 81%. The command deck erupted. Observers immediately began talking. Several replay screens activated simultaneously, reviewing Ethan's decisions, analyzing them, trying to understand them. The simulation ended. Blue Team victory. Not because Ethan saved the most territory, because he saved the most lives. The debrief lasted nearly 2 hours. Fleet officers questioned cadets individually. Strategists reviewed tactical choices. Mistakes were dissected. Successes analyzed. Finally, one admiral turned toward Ethan, a gray-haired Valari veteran with combat ribbons covering half his uniform. You sacrificed 3 colonies. Yes. The admiral nodded. Most commanders would never authorize that. I know. Why did you? Ethan thought for a moment, then answered honestly. Because colonies can be rebuilt. The room became silent. Civilizations survive because people survive. The admiral stared at him. Several officers exchanged glances. Then the admiral slowly nodded, as if confirming something. Not about Ethan. About humanity. Later that evening, Ethan found Kalen waiting on the observation deck. The Croth was staring into the stars. You abandoned territory. Yes. You won. Yes. Kalen remained silent for several seconds, then finally spoke. My people defend borders. Ethan leaned against the railing. My people defend futures. The Croth looked at him. A long look, thoughtful, calculating, respectful. Then unexpectedly Kalen laughed. A deep sound Ethan had never heard before. You humans are impossible. Ethan smiled. We hear that a lot. Far beyond coalition space. Beyond the vanished patrol ships. Beyond the dark frontier. Unknown vessels drifted silently through the void. Watching. Measuring. Preparing. And somewhere within that darkness, something had finally noticed humanity. Not as newcomers. Not as a curiosity. But as a threat. The rumors began spreading 2 days after the grand assessment. Nobody knew where they started. At Arcturus Academy, that usually meant they were true. Ethan first heard it from Darius, which immediately made him suspicious. Darius rarely paid attention to rumors. He paid attention to food. Yet here he was sitting across from Ethan in the mess hall, completely ignoring his lunch. That alone was alarming. What? Ethan asked. Darius glanced around the room, then lowered his voice. My cousin sent a message. Ethan looked up. The cousin again. The fleet engineer. The one who had vanished into a classified project months earlier. What kind of message? Not really a message. Darius frowned. More like a warning. Now Ethan was interested. Across the table, Yara slowly lowered her data pad. She was interested too. Darius leaned closer. She said if anyone asks about Project Eclipse. He paused. Pretend you've never heard the name. Silence. Yara exchanged a look with Ethan. Project Eclipse. Neither of them had heard it before, which immediately made it important. That's all she said? Darius nodded. Then she deleted the transmission. The 3 of them sat quietly. Military personnel didn't erase messages unless they were afraid of somebody reading them. Or somebody reading them wasn't supposed to know. Neither possibility was comforting. The rumors multiplied. Project Eclipse. Ghost Fleet. Dark Division. Black Sector Command. Different names. Same mystery. Something was happening beyond coalition space. Something classified. Something enormous. Even the instructors seemed affected. Several senior officers disappeared from the academy entirely. Others arrived without explanation. Training schedules intensified again. Operational assessments became daily events. And everywhere Ethan looked, military personnel appeared tired. Not exhausted. Focused. The kind of focus that came before a storm. The answer arrived by accident. 3 nights later. Ethan had volunteered for equipment inventory duty. Mostly because inventory duty was quiet. No simulations. No politics. No academy rivalries. Just rows of equipment and a data pad. Exactly what he wanted. The storage complex occupied a lower section of the station rarely visited by cadets. Long corridors. Maintenance access tunnels. Supply depots. The forgotten parts of the academy. Ethan was halfway through a logistics audit when voices echoed from around a corner. Senior voices. Military voices. He stopped walking. Not intentionally. Instinctively. One sentence froze him in place. The prototype is already beyond the frontier. Silence. Then another voice. They shouldn't have deployed it yet. They didn't have a choice. Pause. The Veyron fleet crossed the boundary 3 weeks ago. Ethan's pulse quickened. The Veyron fleet. One of the coalition's most powerful formations. Thousands of personnel. Hundreds of warships. If they were moving secretly, something serious was happening. The first voice spoke again. If Eclipse fails. The sentence stopped. Neither officer finished it. They didn't need to. The silence answered the question. If Eclipse failed. Nothing else existed to replace it. The voices faded. The officers moved away. Ethan remained motionless, trying to process what he had heard. Project Eclipse wasn't a research project. It wasn't a weapons program. It was already deployed. Somewhere beyond known space. Somewhere near the frontier. Somewhere close to whatever had destroyed the patrol ships. The realization settled heavily in his mind. Humanity wasn't preparing for war. Humanity had already started fighting one. Nobody else knew yet. That evening he met Yara and Darius on the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the transparent hull. Silent. Ancient. Watching. Ethan told them everything. Every word. Neither interrupted. When he finished, Yara looked unusually pale. Darius looked unusually serious. Both were bad signs. Eclipse. Yara repeated quietly. Whatever it is, they've hidden it from the entire coalition. Ethan nodded. Which means it's important. No. Yara looked toward the stars. Which means it's terrifying. The 3 stood in silence. Below them the academy continued its routine. Cadets walked corridors. Classes continued. Training exercises ran on schedule. Everything looked normal. Everything looked safe. And that was the frightening part. Because the people in charge were pretending. Pretending everything was ordinary. Pretending war hadn't already begun. Pretending humanity wasn't already committing secret assets somewhere beyond the frontier. 2 days later another patrol ship disappeared. The 3rd loss. This time the academy didn't bother hiding it. An emergency assembly was called immediately. Commandant Soren stood before thousands of cadets. His expression alone told them everything. The room became silent. The situation has escalated. No one moved. No one spoke. No one needed clarification. Everyone understood. The frontier was collapsing. The only question remaining was how long it would take before the war reached them. As cadets filed from the auditorium, Ethan found himself staring through a corridor viewport toward the stars. Project Eclipse. The name echoed in his thoughts. Somewhere out there. Past the frontier. Past the missing ships. Past the edge of explored space. Humanity's greatest secret was already moving. And for the first time, Ethan suspected the galaxy had no idea what humans were truly capable of. The cross-training program started unofficially, which meant it started because Ethan and Kalen decided it should. No instructor ordered it. No academy regulation required it. But after weeks of competing against one another, both had reached the same conclusion. Each possessed something the other lacked. And with war approaching, pride was becoming a luxury. Their first session took place in the zero-gravity combat ring. A massive training sphere attached to the academy's outer structure. Inside, gravity generators remained disabled. Cadets floated freely between obstacles, platforms, and combat markers. Most species struggled here. The Kroth preferred stable footing. Humans adapted reasonably well. The Volari excelled. Kalen excelled more than anyone. Ethan discovered this almost immediately. The moment training began, Kalen launched himself across the sphere. Not fast. Efficient. Every movement flowed into the next. Every push conserved momentum. Every turn conserved energy. It looked effortless. It wasn't. It was mastery. Ethan attempted the same maneuver. 3 seconds later he collided with a training barrier. Art. Kalen watched silently. Then floated over. Again. Ethan rubbed his shoulder. I hate you. No. Kalen shook his head. You hate physics. Currently both. For the first time Kalen smiled openly. Not the tiny expression Ethan had seen before. A genuine smile. Progress. 3 weeks earlier such a scene would have been impossible. The Academy's highest-ranked cadet training voluntarily with a human. Yet now it felt natural. Necessary even. War had a way of revealing what actually mattered. The following day Ethan returned the favor. Simulation Bay 4. Strategic planning exercises. Kalen expected tactics. He expected doctrine. He expected advanced battlefield theory. Instead Ethan handed him a map. A terrible map. The terrain was ugly. Resources were limited. Supply lines were weak. Defenses were outdated. Nothing about the situation looked favorable. Kalen frowned. This scenario is unwinnable. Correct. The Croth blinked. Then what is the objective? Ethan smiled. Win anyway. For nearly 2 hours they worked through possibilities. Kalen proposed textbook solutions. Efficient. Logical. Correct. And every one failed. Eventually frustration appeared. A rare sight. Kalen looked at Ethan. You already know the answer. Yes. Then tell me. Ethan shook his head. No. The Croth narrowed his eyes. Why? Because humans don't solve impossible situations. Kalen waited. We survive them. Silence. Then understanding. Slowly. Carefully. Kalen began re-evaluating the scenario. Not as a strategist. As a survivor. Everything changed. And finally he found the solution. Not victory. Survival. Not conquest. Delay. Not strength. Adaptation. When realization hit, Kalen sat back quietly. For several seconds he simply stared at the map. Then he looked at Ethan. I understand now. Ethan smiled. So do I. Word spread. It always did. Soon cadets throughout the academy noticed the partnership. The rivalry everyone expected to become hostile had transformed into something else. Something stronger. Mutual respect. Some found it inspiring. Others found it unsettling. Because Ethan and Kalen were improving rapidly. Together. One evening after training, the two sat on the observation deck overlooking the stars. The academy was unusually quiet. Most cadets were studying. Others were calling family members before communication restrictions tightened further. The war felt closer every day. Neither spoke for a while. Eventually Kalen broke the silence. My father sent a message. Ethan looked over. The Croth stared out into space. The frontier settlements are evacuating. The words carried weight. Ethan understood immediately. Evacuation meant military planners expected losses. Major losses. My mother left with the civilians. Kalen continued. My father stayed. Neither spoke. There was nothing useful to say. Both understood what that meant. A soldier staying behind. A family leaving. A goodbye disguised as duty. After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke. My older brother serves in the coalition fleet. Kalen looked at him. Ethan rarely discussed family. He volunteered 6 months ago. The stars reflected faintly across the viewport. I haven't heard from him in 23 days. Kalen nodded slowly. No sympathy. No pity. Just understanding. That somehow meant more. For several minutes they sat quietly. 2 cadets. 2 future officers. 2 rivals who were no longer rivals. Watching the same stars. Thinking about different people. Worrying about the same future. Finally Kalen stood. The Croth extended his hand. A human gesture. Still slightly awkward. Still clearly practiced. But genuine. Ethan looked at it. Then shook it. This time neither laughed. Neither made a joke. Because both understood what the gesture meant. Not friendship. Not yet. Something deeper. Trust. The kind built only under pressure. The kind built when uncertainty becomes shared. The kind built before wars. Far beyond the frontier. Beyond the evacuation routes. Beyond the disappearing ships. Project Eclipse continued moving through the darkness. Silent. Hidden. Unknown. And somewhere ahead of it, the enemy was finally making its move. The first enemy ship appeared at 3:17 station time. Most of Arcturus Academy was asleep. Ethan wasn't. Neither was Kalen. The wartime schedule had destroyed normal sleep patterns weeks ago. Ethan was studying fleet logistics in the observation lounge when every light on the station suddenly turned red. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then the emergency alarms began. A long continuous tone. Not a drill. Not a simulation. A real emergency. The kind cadets spent years training for and secretly hoped would never happen. The corridor outside exploded into motion. Doors opened. Cadets emerged. Emergency teams activated. Security personnel sprinted toward command sections. Every face carried the same realization. This was it. Ethan reached Emergency Assembly Point 3 in less than 2 minutes. More than 200 cadets were already present. Yara stood near the front. Darius arrived seconds later. Kalen appeared shortly after. Nobody spoke. The red emergency lights painted the room in crimson shadows. Minutes passed. Then Commander Soren entered. The room immediately fell silent. Her expression told them everything. The war had arrived. At 3:04 station time, she began. A long-range sensor platform detected an unidentified vessel entering Coalition space. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. Soren continued. The vessel ignored all communication attempts. A display activated behind her. The image appeared. And for the first time, the Academy saw the enemy. The room became perfectly silent. The ship was enormous, dark, angular. Unlike any Coalition design. No running lights. No visible identification. No energy signature matching known civilizations. It looked less like a starship and more like a piece of space itself. A black wound moving through the stars. The vessel destroyed Outpost Sigma without issuing communications. Several cadets visibly stiffened. Sigma Outpost was not a military base. It was a civilian relay station. 300 personnel. Families. Engineers. Technicians. Gone. The room felt colder. The image changed. A star map appeared. The enemy vessel's route glowed red. Every system it passed through was marked. Every contact point. Every sensor relay. Every destroyed outpost. The pattern became obvious. Yara saw it first. They're mapping us. Soren nodded. Correct. The enemy wasn't attacking randomly. It was gathering information. Testing responses. Measuring defenses. Learning. Exactly what Ethan feared. The probe had been the beginning. This was the next step. The hunter had revealed itself. A hand rose. One of the senior cadets. How many ships? Soren paused. Then answered. 1. The room froze. 1 ship. Nobody believed it. The destruction listed on the display required a fleet. Not a single vessel. Yet Soren's expression never changed. The vessel has defeated 4 patrol groups. The display updated. Destroyed ships appeared. Coalition casualties. Growing. Relentless. Current designation. Unknown hostile contact Alpha. Silence. Then another cadet spoke. Where is the fleet response? For the first time something changed in Soren's expression. Not fear. Expectation. The fleet is responding. A brief pause. And so is Project Eclipse. The room exploded. Questions. Whispers. Confusion. Project Eclipse. The secret existed. Not rumor. Not speculation. Real. Active. Deployed. Soren raised one hand. Silence returned immediately. The details remain classified. Of course they did. But I can confirm one fact. She looked directly at the assembled cadets. The enemy vessel is no longer the most dangerous ship operating in this sector. The room became still. Completely still. Even the officers standing near the walls exchanged glances. Whatever Eclipse was, it frightened experienced military personnel. That alone was terrifying. The briefing ended 20 minutes later. No answers. Only more questions. Cadets slowly dispersed. Nobody returned to sleep. Nobody even tried. The academy had crossed an invisible line. Training and reality were now the same thing. Hours later, Ethan stood on the observation deck. Yara beside him. Darius nearby. Kalen leaning against the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly before them. Beautiful. Silent. Indifferent. A message notification suddenly appeared on Yara's datapad. She froze. For one terrible second Ethan thought it was bad news. Then she smiled. A small smile. But real. My brother. Relief flooded her face. He's alive. Nobody said anything. They didn't need to. The tension eased slightly. Just slightly. A single piece of good news in a galaxy increasingly filled with bad ones. Kalen received a transmission an hour later. His father. Frontier Command. Still alive. Still holding. The relief in his eyes lasted only seconds. But Ethan saw it. And understood. Because for the first time in weeks, both of them had received proof that someone they cared about still existed. That night, as Arcturus Academy rotated silently above Arcturus Prime, a different vessel moved through the darkness beyond Coalition space. No running lights. No transponder. No registry. No official existence. Project Eclipse. Humanity's greatest secret. For 7 months it had remained hidden. Watching. Waiting. Preparing. Now it was accelerating toward the frontier. Toward the unknown enemy. Toward first contact. And for the first time, the thing hunting humanity was about to discover that humanity had been hunting back. The war officially began at 6:12 station time. Not with an explosion. Not with a battle. Not even with a declaration. It began with silence. The kind of silence that follows bad news. The kind that spreads faster than any alarm. Ethan was in Tactical Strategy Hall 3 when every display in the academy suddenly went dark. Instructor Xerox stopped speaking. The room instantly became still. Then the academy seal appeared on every screen. A station-wide priority transmission. Highest classification. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. The image resolved. Commandant Soren stood before a coalition flag. For the first time since Ethan had known him, the old officer looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. As though the burden he carried had finally become visible. His voice filled the classroom. At 5:48 station time, the Galactic Council formally recognized the state of war. The words landed like a physical impact. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Or the thing everyone expected. The thing nobody wanted. The thing that had been approaching for weeks. Now officially real. Soren continued. The unidentified hostile civilization operating beyond Frontier Sector 7 has rejected all diplomatic contact. The screen changed. Destroyed stations appeared. Burning ships. Sensor recordings. Emergency transmissions. Images the public had never seen. Images deliberately hidden. Until now. Gasps spread through the room. Some cadets stared. Others looked away. A few simply closed their eyes. Because reality was suddenly impossible to ignore. The enemy wasn't coming. The enemy had already arrived. The transmission continued. Effective immediately, all coalition military academies will transition to wartime operations. The classroom became even quieter. Every fourth-year cadet understood what that meant. Graduation was over. Training was over. Childhood was over. Soren confirmed it seconds later. Accelerated officer evaluations begin tomorrow. Pause. Field commissions will be issued within 48 hours. No one spoke. Because everyone knew the truth. Field commissions were not rewards. Field commissions happened when armies needed officers immediately. When casualties were expected. When there wasn't enough time left. After the transmission ended, nobody moved. Not at first. The room remained frozen. Processing. Accepting. Adjusting. Finally Xerox broke the silence. The old Croth strategist slowly looked across the room. At the cadets he had trained. The future officers. The future commanders. The future casualties. For a moment Ethan thought he might give a speech. Instead Xerox simply said, "Class dismissed." Then he walked out. And somehow that felt heavier than any speech could have. The academy changed immediately. Within hours. The atmosphere shifted. Conversations became quieter. More focused. Less about possibilities. More about realities. Equipment inventories doubled. Combat drills intensified. Personnel moved constantly through the corridors. Military transports arrived and departed without explanation. Everywhere Ethan looked, preparations accelerated. The machine of war had awakened. And it was hungry. That evening, Ethan sat with Yara, Darius, and Kalen in the observation lounge. One of the last quiet places remaining on the station. Nobody spoke much. There wasn't much left to say. The future had become unavoidable. Finally Yara broke the silence. "My brother's ship received deployment orders." Ethan looked up. "When?" "This morning." Nobody needed clarification. Frontier deployment. Combat zone. Danger. The words remained unspoken. Darius stared through the viewport. "My cousin sent a message." That got everyone's attention. Project Eclipse. His cousin. The engineer. The one assigned to the secret program. Darius swallowed. Just 3 words. What words? He looked at them. Then answered. "We're almost there." Silence. Heavy silence. Project Eclipse was approaching something. Approaching someone. Approaching war. Kalen spoke next. My father's settlements completed evacuation. Relief touched his voice. Briefly. The military stayed behind. The relief vanished. Because everyone understood what came next. Soldiers remained. Families left. The oldest story in warfare. For a while nobody spoke. The stars drifted beyond the viewport. Silent. Beautiful. Completely indifferent. Eventually Ethan stood. The others looked at him. For weeks people had unconsciously started looking toward him when uncertainty appeared. Not because he had all the answers. Because he remained calm when answers didn't exist. What are you thinking? Yara asked. Ethan looked out at the stars. Thinking. Calculating. Remembering. The simulations. The warnings. The missing patrol ships. The enemy probe. The secret project. Everything leading here. Finally he answered. I think we're about to find out why humanity built only one ship. Nobody spoke. Because everyone had been thinking the same thing. Project Eclipse. One vessel. 7 months hidden. Built in secret. Sent alone toward the frontier. Humanity's answer. Humanity's gamble. Humanity's monster. Far beyond coalition space. Beyond the evacuation routes. Beyond the destroyed patrol fleets. The enemy vessel drifted through a dead star system. Its sensors sweeping across the darkness. Its commanders confident. Its mission progressing exactly as planned. Then a new contact appeared. One ship. No transponder. No registry. No running lights. Approaching rapidly. The enemy sensors focused. Attempting identification. Failing. For the first time since entering coalition territory, the unknown civilization encountered something it could not classify. Something that should not exist. Something built specifically for this moment. And aboard that nameless vessel, humanity was finally ready to answer. The first move of the real war had begun. The first battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 32 seconds. The enemy expected victory. Instead they found humanity. The dead star system designated Frontier Sector 9 contained little of value. 1 dying red dwarf. 3 shattered moons. A scattering of asteroid debris. The perfect place for an ambush. Which was why the enemy had chosen it. The unidentified vessel that had destroyed coalition outposts drifted near the system's center. Silent. Patient. Confident. 4 months it had crossed coalition territory without resistance. Patrol groups destroyed. Stations erased. Defenses bypassed. Every encounter confirmed the same conclusion. The younger civilizations were weak. Predictable. Divided. Easy. The coalition reacted exactly as expected. Retreat. Evacuation. Defensive formations. Fear. The enemy had seen it countless times before. Entire civilizations followed the same patterns. This one would be no different. Then their sensors detected something impossible. One ship. Approaching alone. The contact appeared without warning. No transponder. No registry. No running lights. No recognized engine signature. The vessel simply emerged from the darkness. The enemy immediately attempted classification. The system failed. Again. And again. And again. No database match. No design match. No species match. Nothing. For the first time during the campaign, confusion appeared. The ship continued forward. Steady. Silent. Unhurried. Its silhouette slowly emerged against the distant stars. And every sensor operator aboard the enemy vessel became still. Because the ship was enormous. Not a cruiser. Not a battleship. Not a carrier. Something else. Something larger. Far larger. A moving fortress. A mountain wrapped in armor. Its hull absorbed starlight instead of reflecting it. Entire sections seemed carved from darkness itself. No markings. No insignia. No indication of ownership. Just size. Terrifying size. And purpose. Inside Arcturus Academy, every cadet watched the transmission. The battle feed had been opened across the coalition. Classrooms. Military headquarters. Command centers. Civilian worlds. Billions watched. Ethan. Yar. Darius. Kalen. All staring at the same screen. The same impossible ship. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood. Project Eclipse. The enemy transmitted first. A standard challenge signal. Identity request. Intent request. Territorial violation warning. The message repeated 3 times. No response. The black vessel continued forward. Silent. The enemy fired a warning shot. A beam of concentrated plasma crossed thousands of kilometers. Enough energy to vaporize a cruiser. The blast struck Eclipse directly. Billions watched. The impact vanished. Not deflected. Not absorbed visibly. Vanished. As though the attack had never existed. The battlefield became silent. Even across light years. Even through screens. Silence. Then Eclipse finally transmitted. One signal. One message. One voice. Come, human. This is United Earth Strategic Vessel Eclipse. The voice echoed across every coalition channel. Across every military network. Across every command center. Ethan felt chills run down his spine. Because the voice sounded completely unconcerned. Not brave. Not emotional. Certain. The voice continued. You entered our territory. Silence. You studied our worlds. Silence. You measured our responses. Another pause. Then. Now it is our turn. The enemy opened fire. Everything. Every weapon. Every launcher. Every energy battery. The void erupted. The screen became white. Thousands of impacts. Enough firepower to destroy fleets. Enough firepower to crack moons. Enough firepower to erase civilizations. The barrage continued for 21 seconds. Then stopped. Because there was nothing else left to fire. The light faded. Eclipse remained exactly where it had been. Undamaged. Motionless. Watching. For the first time. The enemy retreated. Only slightly. Only a few kilometers. But the movement appeared on every sensor display. A civilization that had crossed half the frontier without hesitation. Had just taken its first step backward. Ethan saw Kalen straighten beside him. The Krotha's eyes never left the screen. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. History was unfolding in front of them. Then Eclipse moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Simply forward. And the impossible scale of the vessel became obvious. Entire enemy formations disappeared beneath its shadow. The fortress-like ship continued advancing. Calm. Relentless. Certain. As though the outcome had already been decided. Perhaps it had. The enemy attempted withdrawal. Eclipse accelerated. The distance closed instantly. Coalition analysts later spent months studying the maneuver. None successfully explained it. The laws of physics seemed optional. Human engineers had apparently taken offense at reality and redesigned portions of it. A final transmission emerged from Eclipse. The same calm human voice. The same certainty. The same absence of fear. You mistook patience for weakness. The battlefield froze. Every listener remembered those words. Years later. Decades later. Entire generations later. They still remembered. Because those words changed everything. Then Eclipse fired. One weapon. One shot. A single beam of black gold light. The enemy vessel vanished. Not exploded. Not shattered. Vanished. Space itself seemed to erase it. One moment it existed. The next moment it did not. The battle ended. 4 minutes. 32 seconds. Across coalition space, silence followed. Not celebration. Not cheering. Silence. The kind created when reality changes shape. The kind created when an assumption dies. For 60 years humanity had been underestimated. Newcomers. Upstarts. Number 16 on everyone's list. The species that adapted. The species that survived. The species nobody feared. Until now. Inside Arcturus Academy, Ethan stared at the screen. The transmission ended. The battlefield disappeared. Only stars remained. Silent. Ancient. Watching. Kalen finally spoke. Very quietly. Almost to himself. We thought humanity was learning from the galaxy. Ethan looked at him. The Krotha's eyes remained fixed on the stars. We were wrong. A long silence followed. Then Ethan smiled. A small smile. A human smile. Yeah. Beyond the frontier, Eclipse turned toward deeper darkness. Toward regions no map described. Toward enemies still unseen. Toward wars not yet fought. The first battle had ended. The real story was only beginning. Because somewhere in the darkness, something far older than the enemy vessel had noticed what happened. And for the first time in a very long time, was afraid. The end.